Hey Joe, have you ever gone on a nice walk? It's a cool summer evening, or I should say windy because it's not really cool here, but it's a nice summer night. Okay,
Okay, okay.
and
Pictures painted, yes.
yep, you're minding your own business, and then suddenly you're ambushed by a large, colorful bird that's flightless.
I I thought we could get further into the review before we brought up the cassowary and how it is in fact the true villain of this game and of the next game.
Yeah, yes, we're gonna cut right to it. So today we are going back to retro reviews to discuss Far Cry 3, which Joe is absolutely correct. It's one of those the Far Cry series in general has this tendency for animals to kind of jump out of nowhere and attack you.
hmm
But yes, one has a very different profile than the rest of them.
And for good reason. And I think in real life, like they're actually vicious. Like they are highly protective of their territories. They've been known to kill humans before. And I actually remember some internet trickery around the cassowary years ago where they had this dinosaur claw that was preserved perfectly in the ice and how it was making its rounds and people were believing, oh, I can't believe it, it's incredible. It was just the fucking cassowary claw. And it's like, Jesus Christ. I think
Yeah.
it's just terrifying.
Yes, it is very terrifying. It makes the game interesting, though. A little bit of spice every now and
hmm
again. Like imagine Emerald Lagasse just like bamming some spice into the game at that point.
Just boom, cassowary.
Yeah,
Like, fuck.
bam, shit, feathers. Yes, but
hmm
to the point of Far Cry, though. I mean, this is the profile that I think a lot of people are used to now. I mean, we've been
hmm
around Far Cry for decades, and nowadays it's one of those mainstream. I think most people are always talking about or at least familiar with, right?
Yeah, it's if it's not a household gaming name, it's pretty close to it. Like it's like you've been gaming for a while, you've at least heard of Far Cry, if you haven't played it yet yourself.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays it's almost a part of that continuing cash cow that Ubisoft is pretty
hmm
much churning out. I wouldn't say annually, but every 2 or 3 years we've
hmm
got another entry. But this one specifically, the third installment in the Far Cry series, was made by Ubisoft Montreal, which for those of you that may not know how these studios are split up, well, this is the specific branch of Ubisoft that's known for Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, and also developing obviously Assassin's Creed,
hmm
Watch Dogs, For Honor. They're a pretty busy studio.
Yeah, have their hands full, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah,
hmm
and they're not just doing things just to do them either. This isn't Rick James out here. They're actually making pretty good video games.
Yeah.
It's just
hmm
whether or not you subscribe to that annual installment, controversy that a lot of people just
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh,
I
heaven
mean,
forbid you have to play a video game every year.
yeah, right?
But I mean, to some of that, there is some like warrant to the griping about like the annual installments because sometimes, and Assassin's Creed is definitely guilty of this. Sometimes the games do feel rushed,
Mm,
and you end up with games that need one to maybe four patches before they feel like they actually run properly and are ready to go. So some people would like prefer that like maybe you go every few years and you give us a game that's ready to go right off the bat and it's fun to play and is actually fleshed out the way that you would hope the developer would want to have made before it actually hits the market.
hmm Yeah, which it seems to be rare nowadays that people are
hmm
actually putting out completed games. But
Yeah.
here we are, Joe. But I say here we
hmm
are, but actually we are in the year 2012 yet again. We've been here before, and we want to put people back into the mode of what Far Cry 3 would have been doing at this point in time,
Yeah. hmm
which in the gaming industry, we were still trying to figure out, hey, how can we actually tie in other things to video games? How can we expand on, the
hmm
universes that we're building? Because Joe, if you remember, Assassin's Creed 2, they were making short films, right?
Yeah. hmm
I mean, and making interactive apps, and so here we've got Far Cry 3 doing the same thing. We've got a companion app for Far Cry 3 called The Outpost, which really just helps you track your stats and
Hmm.
make it easier to swap out your weapons when you're playing on
Hmm.
multiplayer, which is a very odd thing to do. But hey,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah,
I,
it's
I,
2012.
yeah, it's. I mean, they're trying. They were trying. That I think that's the big thing to remember. Just looking for different ways to get you involved with the game, and this is something that I think definitely got better over the years as far as like involvement because eventually you get things where I think like Fallout 4 gets a pretty good companion app where you're basically just like designing your bunker. But hey, it was fun, it was engaging, and it was something good to do. Um, whereas this I would say of Far Cry 3, very little of this game felt like it was lost and confusing, despite the fact that development may have been lost and confusing during this whole thing, since wasn't there like I'm pretty sure like a few key members actually either left or walked out like while this game was being developed.
Yeah, during this time period, the video game industry had various different scandals that were kind of weaving in and out. Ubisoft, of course, wasn't unique to this. They ended up having a very high profile harassment case that actually involved one of the key higher ups, like in the Assassin's Creed side of the house, which unfortunate scenario there. But I don't think that was quite what was going on with this. I'm guessing this was one of those cases where people just kind of got tired of working 90 to 100 hours a week. Maybe they moved on to
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah. That seems like it's a ridiculous amount of work to ask to be done in such a short period of time. So do not blame them. And not to mention that I feel like they were like key changes to the story made in this because, like you had mentioned, one of the characters already, Voss, who is the main villain of the game, actually turns out isn't the main villain of the game because he was not initially meant to be the main villain of the game.
He wasn't even meant to be in it. I mean,
Yeah.
he
Hmm.
so the large part of Voss, this is one of those like video game facts that I don't think is quite as well known as, let's say, Viggo Mortensen breaking his foot during the Lord of the Rings. But I think a lot of people are familiar with it. But if they're not, yeah,
Hmm.
the character of Voss Montenegro, who a lot of folks are probably recognizing as the guy on all of the marketing pieces, right? Like he's on the cover
Hmm.
of the damn
Game,
game.
yeah.
Yeah, he was
Hmm.
never actually meant to be in this game. And now, like, if you go look back at Far Cry Media, I mean, he's even prominently featured in the shorts that they made for this game. So
Hmm.
it just goes to show you how, if you really bring it to the audition, sometimes things are going to happen for you. And
Yeah.
that's what happened to Michael Mando, dude. He just
Hmm.
showed up and just killed the audition. And so they literally molded the game around his performance. It's pretty solid.
Hmm. And that's for the better because when you compare him versus the actual main villain of the game, Hoyt, like there is so much more character and personality, and I'd have to say weight whenever Voss is involved versus Hoyt, because Voss is who you like see and meet like right off the bat in this game. It's actually kind of a fun way the video game starts, which speaking of that, we'll hold off on that for a little bit because that's also like let's do what we've been doing recently and kind of look at the world of video gaming in 2012 when this game came out, because we had quite a bit of really quite a bit of good games that came out during this time. Mass Effect 3 was one of them. Borderlands 2 came out during this, which Mark, was that your favorite of the Borderlands?
It just may be. I
Yeah.
mean, in terms of narrative, you bet your ass it's one of my favorites. Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, solid game. And we've actually been to this year before, believe it or not, Joe.
Yeah.
Because when we were here for the Telltale games, The Walking Dead,
Mm-hmm.
obviously came out the same year, but this was like the year of like the high profile sequel, right?
Yeah.
Because we also got Max Payne 3, Diablo 3, Halo
Yeah.
4,
Oof.
and then of course we also mentioned Sleeping Dogs the last time that we were here in
Mm-hmm.
2012, which is basically a standalone
Yeah.
GTA that just takes
Not a
place
sequel.
with yes, not a sequel. But one of the games that I recently started playing again was Prototype
Mhm.
2 that also came out this year. So fuck yeah, dude. 2012 is a good year.
Yeah. Great fucking year. So now getting back to this game, it throws you into the shit kind of right away in a very, very fun manner where it has a very, very cinematic opening. And we say cinematic, obviously most games start with some sort of quick cinema, like cutscene, something to get you into the game. But this one legitimately feels like you're watching a movie. Not to be confused, like with the graphics are so rich that you're actually lost on it, because that's not the truth. Like this came out with the PlayStation 3, and while the graphics were good for their time, one of the gripes I would say was that the PlayStation 3 did kind of struggle to keep up the 30 frames per second of this game at times. But I digress. You kind of end up in this what feels like Tarantino-esque moment where you've got you and your friends having a great time partying on this island, and we're seeing all these great visuals of you on the beach, of you like jumping out of a plane with parachutes, not an emergency scenario, for fun. You're at nightclubs, you're having a great time, you're getting drunk, and then suddenly that visual starts to pull back and it's on a cell phone and you're in a cage. And that's when we're introduced to Voss, the main villain of the game, because again, he gets all the cover art here, and then you really kind of see just how like in the thick of it you actually are at this point in time. So, yeah, Mark, take it from there. What do you think about the game?
I mean, I thought it was a really good bait and switch to start off the game because, once again, dropping us back into this era, we were just a little bit past this whole extreme, obsession, right? We had Doritos with extra seasoning. We had Mountain Dew with a little bit more caffeine, which was still too much.
Man.
And yeah,
and like 95% of your added sugars for the day, may I add.
Yes. Yeah, you don't need teeth when you're drinking Mountain Dew,
No.
and that's by design because it'll literally melt them away. But
Yeah.
it was kind of placing you into, I would say, the tail end of that part of life, right? Like we've got these people who are out there doing the death-defying, skydiving stunts and all this kind of stuff, and so
Yeah.
it does kind of feel like that MTV reality show at first. And so, yeah, I agree with you that when you get brought back into this, and Voss is talking to you, basically calling you a basic bitch,
Yeah.
which really I don't disagree with him on that one. That's pretty accurate. But
I mean, I'm half surprised that we didn't have like a visor turned upside down and like backwards while we were like partying on the island, to be honest.
yeah, pop collars, like, dude, I can't. This is something that I am kind of ashamed of with early 2000s life, was that the pop collar was a thing.
It was a thing.
God, dude, I saw a guy once have 4 pop collars on at the same time.
We
It's
can
just
only
too
hope
much.
he was trolling.
but but seriously, that's what this world was like, man. This was a different. I mean, yeah, we're talking 11 years ago, but man, this was the kind of stuff that people were still trying to make it seem interesting.
Yeah,
And
it was the goal. You walk into a party, you've got a popped collar, and you've got a super tight polo, and the guy who's checking IDs at the party says, "Hey, bro, could you find a tighter polo?" And you're like, "No, there's none tighter. I checked." That was the
yes,
style of the time.
yes, totally, dude. And that's why I love how we're cutting through it. I think that's why for me that this entry sequence was so compelling, was that you've knocked these, what we're assuming are like rich kids that are out partying on a holiday. Suddenly, we're kind of roped into more of a hostile scenario, right? Everybody's captured. We're in cages, and so I do love how immediately the stakes are high and dangerous, and Voss once again, this is Michael Mando just being amazing at what he does. He has this way of speaking where it's like there's resentment behind his teeth, but he's not always like showing his true feelings.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this guy could go off the deep end at any moment. He can flip shit in an instant.
As I say, like he'd go like 0 to 60 in half a second. Like
God.
he just would fly off the handle on you. There was such a great villain where he could have this kind of like, you get this moment where he seems to be playful and kind of messing around and really going like messing with your head, and then he just cuts right to like this extreme harsh anger where now you are just absolutely fearful for your life.
It almost feels like him and Daniel Day-Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
Like Daniel Day-Lewis gave him some pointers on how to play a charismatic yet unhinged
Mm-hmm.
villain because
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
he is so charismatic it almost makes it hard for you to real like sometimes you're fighting yourself going I do hate this guy
Yes.
but I kind of
But,
like him. Yeah. you're,
but,
yeah. You're like the kombucha girl. You're like going like, it's like wait, no, I still hate
no,
him.
no.
Wait, nope,
Wait,
still hate
wait,
him.
yep, no, still bad.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
dude, I mean, right away, part of it that got me was like you in almost every Far Cry game you have to escape in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. There's usually a very big theatrical, fast paced way to kick it off, and so of course this is not changing. This is the same
Yeah.
thing here.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically chased off into the jungle. People get extra holes put in them, and now we're knee deep into the story. So it's a fun way to kick off. I love it, man. I really love how
Yeah.
these games don't give you a chance to get comfortable.
No, no.
They just don't.
And we weren't the only ones who loved it because I think when this game came out, since because they did a remaster and re-release in the PS4,
Yeah.
which gave you pretty much the exact same game except they cut out online and multiplayer. Those modes were gone, which we'll get to those modes when we get to the review too. But talking specifically about this game, like its ratings were pretty darn high. I think like Metacritic was 8.9, IGN gave it a 9. So these were two pretty hefty reviews that have a lot of weight, like at least two areas as far as video games have a lot of weight behind them with how much they really like this game.
It's an interesting crossroads because Ubisoft was initially disappointed with how it sold. Like
Yeah.
they thought it was underperforming when it first hit the market, but
Mm-hmm.
none of the reviews or the critics were really matching that. Like the critics are like going, "Oh my god, this is great! It's getting nominated for Game of the
Mm-hmm.
Year awards. It has a Game of the Year edition that comes out." I mean, it, it's a very strange thing. Normally, we're talking about scenarios where the critics are hard on something, but then the
Mm-hmm.
fans kind of pull it out and go, "No, this is actually really good." Not happening here. Uh,
No.
yeah.
This is very similar to the Dread dilemma in that the grosses were just too low, but the critics and the people loved it. However, thankfully, unlike sadly with Dread, there would be a sequel,
Oh,
several
absolutely.
sequels. But I
Well,
digress. Hmm.
it's worth looking at where Far Cry was versus where it went with 3.
Hmm.
Because like when we talked about Grand Theft Auto in our last retro review, there weren't a whole lot of people that were really amped up about the first two.
No.
So, some people might know about it, but not.
Hmm.
It wasn't a marquee name that you're going to notice, right? And Far Cry 1 and 2 were kind of in the same space. There are people who liked it, but they're still regarded as standard FPS kind of games. Like 1
Hmm.
especially was, but 2 had much more of like a choice based narrative. You do this and the story becomes this. So it was gaining steam, but 3, as odd as the performance would indicate, blew the doors off of the franchise.
Yeah, and I think this is where Ubisoft can really thank the prior experience of making other games, notably Assassin's Creed, really made it so that this first person shooter would actually really, really shine as this open world feel. Is, I think, kind of like some people really enjoy the open world parts, some people enjoy more of a sandbox style game. This felt like it really was kind of a combination of both with how well it pulled things off, where you were isolated to specific parts of island for certain missions, and obviously you would fail after the mission start and you left the area. So that had a kind of a sandbox feel to it. But at the same time, what this game succeeded at, where its predecessors failed, was because of things that Assassin's Creed did, where it wasn't just this huge map to explore. You had to unlock visuals by like taking over outposts and towers like you had to do in Assassin's Creed. You had additional crafting things you could do. So like you didn't just hunt animals for the sake of hunting animals. You actually needed them to upgrade your equipment. And it gave you a plethora of different things to try too. And like all the things worked well. I felt like every gun kind of worked a little different than the others, but they all had heft and a good amount of power. All of the cars had this perfect combination of they're bouncing up and down and they handle well four things trying to drive 50 miles an hour on mud and gravel. And you would
Hmm.
definitely feel that that's how you were driving because you would feel like you had control. And as soon as you took a turn, you realized you were definitely going way too fast. So it just gave a lot of depth and richness to this greater world. Not to mention, you even get a skill tree you got to fill out and do in this game. So honestly, a lot of very 2012 like video game things to do with unlocking the map and skill trees and things to craft. But instead of like us looking back and like, oh god, it was just another 2012 video game, this was a 2012 video game that did all those things particularly well. And it
Hmm.
didn't feel like it was as a grind necessarily. It felt like it was just a game with more for you to do and more for you to enjoy.
Which I do agree with, because when you talk about just doing things as a grind, I think about like Grand Theft Auto 5 online, where you have to do a mission almost 600 times just to get to a secret at the end. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's not really what Far Cry 3 is doing. Far Cry 3 only has about 14 side missions that take
Mm-hmm.
place, and you don't even have to do them until you finish the game. Like
Yeah.
they help your gameplay. They help some of the, getting some of the weapons and some of the crafted materials faster.
Mm-hmm.
So you're rewarded for exploring, but you don't have to. So
No. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a wise choice from a game developer that's not just trying to extend something by another 5 hours, right?
Yeah.
It, it's stuff that's deliberately put there that if you want to do it, you can. And for
Mm-hmm.
people like Joe and I who hunt down the trophies in every game we play, it can feel a little grindish when you're doing that. But
Mm-hmm.
this was not one of those games where I ever got that vibe, and we'll get to that in the review here in a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
as far as the story goes, obviously we know about a man named Voss, who is the first bad guy that we come across.
Mm-hmm.
But in a Far Cry game, it's not just about the bad guys, it's about the opposing forces as well, because we're always faced with that in these types
Mm-hmm.
of games. So that introduces us to the Rakyat people, who this is basically assumed it's like an Indonesian type of environment, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
chain of islands, uh, and we can assume it's that part of the world based off of some of the indigenous peoples and how tattoos are
Mm-hmm.
portrayed in this game, how they dress, right? And so right away, you've got this freedom fighters versus pirates kind of vibe happening here. I've always wondered what other people's takes were on this, Joe, because it has been a little while since both of us played this together. Yes. So, Joe, what was your thought on like the Rakyat people as a, I guess, as a comparison to the
Mm-hmm.
Voss side of the world, which is like these pirates? Do you want to call them? Uh, I don't know. Like they are opposing forces to each
Yeah.
other, but
Mm-hmm.
it would seem odd that pirates are causing issues for these indigenous people, don't you think?
A little bit, yeah. See, this is where I feel like kind of where a little weaker part of the game comes in is that while the story there's there's a really great theme going on playing in through the background of the story that on your first playthrough you may not completely pick up on because the upfront story is a little cliche in that like you've got like clearly these invading pirates and then you've got like the people who've always lived there supposedly. My supposedly is because like you do meet the main member of the Rakyat, Citra, who is Voss's sister. Not a huge story, not a huge like, oh no, spoiler alert. Again, the game's old, so I don't know. Like I just felt like they were there because you needed something to oppose the pirates, and it just feels like, like kind of like a government would have felt better or made more sense to be imposing upon the locals as opposed to pirates. But I digress. This is just where it felt like they were, I don't know, some cliche looks to things of like people living on islands and being indigenous and having to have a dated look and feel to them as opposed to having any sort of like sense of modernity to them because any modernity they have is due to other characters who've kind of come in along the way to help them out and these are usually like inside men who are working with the pirates, or they are like gun runners, or other characters who've come in and brought culture and brought like modern things to them. So this is one where it feels a little forced, and I don't know if I was all like gung ho, like, yay, the Rakyat, let's do this sort of thing with it.
I think this, I don't know if this makes me deranged or
Mm-hmm.
not, but it doesn't really feel like the sense of suffering is nearly as high as some of the subsequent Far Cry games.
Mm-hmm.
And because think about this, man, when you have 4, 5, and 6, like I've played all the subsequent games in this series,
Mm-hmm.
and I really do enjoy them. But in 4, you have basically like a dictatorship that's controlling, these peoples, right? And so in 5, it's kind of like this dystopian, far right organization that's captured
Mm-hmm.
part of Montana. And 6 is once again more of like a Cuban dictatorship, right? So this is one of those games where the piracy angle and this like privateer presence, it feels like it should be easier to rally people to fight back on that.
Yeah.
Um, it,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because they're a privateer organization. Like, how many people could they realistically have,
Mm-hmm.
fighting for them? So it's the struggle doesn't appear to be as much for me, which
Yeah.
I think is what kind of hinders it a little bit there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think this could come from the fact that we've talked about this before. Is that Voss is obviously the bad guy,
Mm-hmm.
but he actually makes a dramatic exit about halfway through this game.
Yeah.
So that
Mm-hmm.
does skin knees a little bit, because you're taking someone who you've frankly invested a lot of time in as a character,
Mm-hmm.
who also impacts your character in his own development, and then he's gone, and now you're switching gears to this, like, this guy who's basically been in the shadows for the better part of the game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, it just, yeah,
Yeah,
the wind
and I
gets out of the
guess,
sails.
and part of that really does it is, again, is how we mentioned how Voss had so much character and personality and time invested in him, whereas like Hoyt comes in, he's like, oh, okay, so this is the actual big bad. We should really be afraid of this guy, and at no point do you ever actually feel that? Like there is like the stakes to it when Hoyt comes in is more like, okay, we just need to finish the job, as opposed to this is the guy that we really need to worry about. Because Voss, again, was just such a better villain of that. Like this guy's unhinged. Who knows what he's gonna do? He is very much kind of like this. What we're afraid of, and like about modern piracy, is that they'll do anything to do what they need to get what they want. Whereas Hoyt is like, I don't know, he kind of has this half-ass businessman like sense to him, where he, if
Yeah.
there's like some sort of corporate face to modern piracy, that's what Hoyt is. But we don't really, I don't know. It feels like, okay, Hoyt's just one more thing to do. that's that's I guess where that feeling would come in this game. It's like, I guess while I'm at it, I suppose take out this guy too.
But he also, just in his style of dress, he feels like he could be someone at the night at the Roxbury, just
Mm-hmm.
dancing behind like he has this really bizarre, yeah, this really bizarre
Mm-hmm.
kind of look to him, and he feels like, frankly, a bro. Whereas you
Mm-hmm.
have Voss, who is like galvanized by violence and just being brutal to people, and then you have Hoyt, who it's like he feels less baked, even though he was supposed to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And it does struggle a little bit, because yeah, you build up to this climax with Voss, and then it's expecting you to get hard again for the next half. Honestly, I'm a three
Yeah.
pump chump when it comes to this storyline. Okay, that's just how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
yeah, this is where kind of though where like there is like a greater theme going on in the background, which actually is like on Ubisoft's part pretty. I don't know. It's pretty solid social commentary, because when you look at your character, what is he going to the island for? He's hoping to have a good time with his friends, and in the process, he ends up kind of becoming this really violent person that he also really enjoys being by the end of it.
yeah,
So when you look at you as a person who's playing this video game, you're going into it doing pretty much the same thing. You're looking to a video game to hopefully provide you with a good time and entertainment. And by the end, you are really enjoying how much you're like basically devastating this local
Yeah.
island by killing its people, the pirates, anyone who gets in your way, and how much you tend to really enjoy the violence. And how much of a problem that really should be.
Which the writers did this on purpose. Like it was meant to be
Mm-hmm.
a commentary on how us as gamers, if you're not well adjusted or if you're not careful, sometimes you can go into this space that you really shouldn't be, which is removing yourself from what's real and what isn't, and not understanding what the consequences of your actions are. And so as you kind of go through that, that journey feels like it's tied into Voss
Mm-hmm.
and you as a character. And that's why I think it is kind of half baked that when certain things happen between you and Voss, does kind of feel like that arc probably should have been where the game ended and
Yeah.
not halfway through.
Mm-hmm.
So it, and this isn't just us saying this. There are many people who have kind of stated this in the last 10, 11 years. But it does come to a question, Joe, of whether or not this story works, because it's, once again, it's 2012. We're starting to get more dramatic narratives in video games, which we've talked about a few times on this
Mm-hmm.
program. Now, this is not an FPS game that is linear. Like Far Cry 1, very linear game. 2, much more open world. Now, as a cinematic game, Joe, what do you really think of whether or not this whole system works?
I think it works. Like this is also, us after coming in and saying that like Hoyt felt like lazy and half baked that he came in, and that the locals were kind of like a cliche more than anything. But like as a story, like I think it works and it works just fine because it's going to give us who appears to be a very clear villain for us to overcome and for us to beat, and that the hero of the story is going to have to overcome a lot of a lot of personal things to be able to do this, and that we see like character development throughout. I mean, it's you could probably say it's character. I don't want to say like regression because he's developing into something that is much more, I don't know, bestial, like if that's the right one, or kind of like villainous himself. And then along the way, of course, like some good stories, like you'll find out that the lines between the good and the bad are a little blurry, not in such a terribly cliche way. Although I think the end of the game, which I won't go into fully, it gives you an illusion of choice, and I didn't like that. I did not like that basically they kind of corner you into doing two things, and I wanted to do neither of the two things. I wish there was a very clear third option, which should be there, but it just isn't. Um, so that is like probably like my biggest gripe about the story is that like you can't end it the way that you may have were hoping to when you set out to play the game. But other than that, like we have good villains, we have a good character in Brody who's changing throughout, and we've got a great supporting cast to kind of aid Brody along on the journey. So even though the story itself, I would say maybe isn't anything like groundbreaking, there is enough there to guide it along, kind of like how much we like to make fun of Avatar for just being Pocahontas on another planet. Um, Kind of the same deal. It's a story we've heard before, but a lot of stories we've heard are other stories that are from other stories we've heard before. It's how well do they tell that story and how entertained are you by the way they're telling it now? And I have to say, in 2012, I was pretty darn entertained by that story.
I was going to say that I do largely agree with you. Now, as far as the ending goes and what you're forced to do, um, it's not really all that crazy because the majority of the game you are still fighting between working with the Rakyat and still trying to rescue your friends and balancing what's being asked of you between both, right? And that's what the ending forces you to do. It does
Mm-hmm.
make you make that ultimate decision between these factions, right? Your friends or the Rakyat people. But I think that this game, from a narrative standpoint, it's very much the visceral experience, right? And for folks that don't know what visceral means, if you look in the dictionary, it refers to of viscera, which doesn't help anyone.
No.
We're more just talking about feelings, like deep seated feelings and how they impact people, rather than like intellectual discussions, right? And so for Far Cry 3, you're living in the visceral far more than you are actually like going, let me think about every angle here. It's like, no, 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 I'm going to stab things. It's like, no, I'm going to skin 10 types of animals to make one bag, okay? It's like that's more what this game kind of is about, and it ramps up. Like that's totally what to look for, is like your character is almost becoming the things that he's trying to fight. And it's an interesting nuance, which I do think this game pulls off for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And in that, obviously, we've been spending a great deal of time on the story mode of this game, because honestly, that is where this game shines, is throughout its story mode, which, for obvious reasons, is why when they remastered the game, is the only part of the game that was remastered. Because they could have clearly remastered the co-op missions, which is like the multiplayer part of it. And like that, I could see being doable, because that just requires someone else grabbing a controller and playing along with you. That's pretty easy to do. Whereas like revitalizing an online server to get the online game going again, I don't think there have really been any remasters that have ever brought back the online portion of a game. They usually leave that out. So when we look at those two components of it, these were things where they felt out of place, but at the same time, like, not bad, because looking at multiplayer in general, multiplayer was nothing special. Like, you had like death matches, capture the flags, I think, like pretty much what any standard like first person shooter is going to have. And it feels like it's there just because, like, at this point in time, like the online portion of games being the main part of the game was still like a fairly relatively new concept, where like story modes still mostly shined. So this is like a, hey, everybody's got a multiplayer. We should probably put a multiplayer like online aspect to it. Kind of like how now like the battle royale like really took off, and now every game has battle royale. That's kind of like what this felt like. It's like, hey, here's an online like shooter competition because it's in all the other first person shooter games. Here's a way to extend playing the game. But that's why I'd like to focus more on the multiplayer part. And Mark, what did you feel about the multiplayer? Because this was definitely on our like platinum grind that we did years ago. So what was this like for you as you were completing it with me?
For one, the multiplayer for this was an absolute afterthought. It wasn't even as baked as games of a similar nature were, because you have Borderlands 2 at the same time, which has drop in, drop out co-op, and it was freaking wonderful. This game has a mode that takes a long time to boot up. Like it requires time to connect to the online server to play the multiplayer stuff. And it wasn't great. I mean, I remember you and I sitting there frustrated because it takes time to get through these modes. And in general, you're usually going to win them, but every now and again, it's like you're in minute 9 of a 10-minute mission, and then suddenly it drops out, or something didn't register. It's like, oh god. So from the perspective of someone who's trying to do the trophy hunting, not one of my favorite games to do that with, at least in reference to the multiplayer. But the rest of the game, obviously, it was very, very much fun. I couldn't put it down. But yeah, multiplayer, this is not one I was ever going to come back to for that. Never.
Yeah. and as much as like we would like we did have the gripe to it of saying like, yeah, you get 9 minutes in and then something happens when you're supposed to be done in a minute. But that to be said, like as soon as multiplayer did load, like what you did was still fun. It just again felt like if you were gonna do this, you should have put a little more into it. So it wasn't that like you hated doing the multiplayer experience. It just was an obvious afterthought, I think was what we're going with here.
I hated it for the technical requirements. That not because it wasn't fun to play the game with my friends. That's usually how that spins with multiplayer experiences. But you know what, Joe? We've talked about this game at length, about some of the behind the scenes and the core content. Now it's time to drive down onto our ratings. which we always start off with graphics. But before we get to that, today's unit of measurement is going to be the supply drop,
Yes.
which is one of the fun racing missions, right? Where you go and track down a box of goodies out in a randomly chosen location. But from a graphics perspective, Joe, what do you want to give this out of 5 possible supply drops?
I would give this 4.5 supply drops out of 5, solely because like the game did look beautiful, but this is where you would have it start to struggle on you because of, I feel like sometimes because of the very rich graphics that were over this game to make it look as beautiful as it did, the PS3 kind of struggled to keep up with the need for it. So things would render in a little late, and that would kind of take you out of it. It's kind of like how like when you go to some place and you get this beautiful like piece of scenery and you're in awe of what's happened. Imagine of having to look at that scenery for a few seconds for it to actually be there, and then now it's beautiful. Yeah, that's kind of what it is. Where like the graphics are gorgeous, but they were trying to do more than I think the system could actually put up with at the time.
Which honestly is a very similar issue to what was going on with like Fallout New Vegas, roughly around the same time period. There are some hardware limitations, which I agree do impact this game quite a bit compared to future installments. I will say that in general, though, the graphics themselves never really took me out of the immersion. I mean, like you mentioned, the weapons look great, the explosions look great. Even looking back to some other remasters, like when you see an explosion in a game that came out around the same time, sometimes you see like pixelated images that are just kind of copied and pasted to simulate fire. Not really what's going on here. So I agree with you. I think for me it's like a 4.0. I mean, similar space, but yeah, I agree with you. I actually had that happen to me a lot while I played this game, where the textures wouldn't quite catch up, and so. Yes, the graphics look good when they got there, but I do have to dock it a full point for that. Yeah. So I was a little bit harsher than you were on that. When it comes to gameplay, though, now I really thought that as a function, Joe, this game functioned for what it was supposed to do extremely well. Whether this was how the weapons worked, whether it was how like the bow and arrow operated, right? Like how I interacted with the environment of Far Cry 3 was never really a problem. I mean, I really enjoyed what was there and what was available to me. I did the side missions because I found them fun, not because they were something else to do.
True. Yeah.
So yeah. And now, when it comes to gameplay, though, that doesn't just mean shooting things and getting XP and all that stuff. This also means how you heal yourself in the game. Because there are times where when you heal yourself, it's not just about injecting something or wrapping a bandage. There are times when like your thumb is pointing a direction it shouldn't be, and you heal yourself by relocating it and popping it back into place. Like the first time you do that kind of makes your gut churn a little bit. But then I found myself going like, oh man, I want to heal myself again just to see what happens, right? And so that was one of those little nuances where I was like, oh my God, this is actually really cool. But to the point of the RPG elements, though, before this point in time, there are only a handful of like first-person shooters that have really good RPG elements built in. Obviously, Borderlands was a big part of trailblazing that idea, and Far Cry 3 does it in a sense where it's not maybe as spectacular as Borderlands does it, but it's grounded to like the mythos and what we're doing in the game, right? Like there are some spiritual things kind of going on, which give you some powers that you might consider supernatural, Joe. Yes.
Some may say supernatural.
Yes. Some may say unnatural. Yes. But they worked for me. I thought they were really fun. So for me, I actually give gameplay a perfect score because it's really well fleshed out. I thought it was fantastic.
I'm gonna be close to you on this one. No, so a lot of what you said, I wholeheartedly agree with. There are just a few like add-ons that I would put. Like I absolutely loved how like there's actually like a full on like ecosystem like on display here with like depending on how you interacted with some animals, other animals would actually be like attracted to the area based off of what you did. So like you clearly, if there were pigs in the area, leopards would be around shortly to like kind of pick them off. You would have the unfortunate accident every once in a while being ambushed by Komodo dragons.
Hmm.
And again, the fact that again, part of like we said, like how like the Rakyat and a few and kind of like their tattoos and other things kind of led you to believe you're in Indonesia. If you know anything about the actual ecology of Indonesia, the wildlife and the plant life also let you know that that was the area you were in. So I thought that was incredibly well done. The gripes that I did have with this is I feel like while the weapons were fun to use, I feel like a lot of times when you really tried aiming, not everything aimed incredibly well. Meaning you look down the sights, you're right on something, and you're trying to get a headshot, and it just veers a little off. And this isn't like how some games will have like the weapon naturally kind of like goes and supposed to simulate you breathing, and then you can hold your breath and the weapon gets still. It's no, the weapon's still, and it just didn't hit what it was aimed on, and that got frustrating. There are also some missions where I think you're supposed to like it's meant to have just like wave after wave of enemy coming, and that's okay. What wasn't okay is sometimes they would literally just load right in front of you, like they would pop out of nowhere. It wasn't like you saw a truck driving down the road and suddenly, oh crap, here's 10 more guys. I kill them, and oh crap, here's another truck coming. It's like nope, they just snapped right in, and that would get kind of annoying from time to time, especially in some missions. And then one thing that I'll always gripe about in any game is forced stealth. This
Oh
did
yeah,
pop up
yeah.
every once in a while in the game where if you got caught, you were obviously you failed the mission. Got to load it up, got to try it again. That's always a problem for me because stealth sucks. So I'm gonna go the same I did with graphics on this and give this 4.5 supply drops out of 5.
I, now I do want to make an addendum because yes, stealth sucks. The amount of stealth missions in
Mm-hmm.
this game weren't nearly as egregious as
Mm-hmm.
some other Ubisoft games. Like there are a couple that can be troublesome, but even
Mm-hmm.
though that's the case for them, there's one in particular where you have to go into like a an abandoned like vessel, like an abandoned like supply ship, and even if you get caught by somebody, you still have enough time to make up for that mistake in that
Mm-hmm.
mission. So like it could be a lot worse, but I agree with you in that. And the other thing that I didn't even mention, neither one of us did, is how there are some quick time events that impact certain fights too.
Yep.
So I don't love the quick time event as a mechanic overall,
Mm-hmm.
but it is used sparingly. It's not over the top. So I want to add that in there. Justification of the score. Well, Joe, what about replay
Mm-hmm.
value? What do you think about plugging this game back in after your first helping?
Honestly, I haven't done that. So that's one thing where I think this would probably hurt for it, especially since I feel like the remaster. Really, I think if you played the game once, I don't know if I would like say like go out and buy the remaster unless like you absolutely loved playing the story of this game because obviously like we said the afterthought like multiplayer and online experience like that's cut out from it completely. And when we say that like that part is gone, which is usually where like a lot of the replay would be, is in the online portion of it, and now we're left with just the story. Um, I suppose if you could shoot through the story pretty quickly if you really wanted to, but I think if you do that and you leave out the amount of exploration that you can do in this game of really like spreading out around the island, unlocking as many things as you can, I think that takes away from the experience as opposed to just playing it for the story, especially since we just kind of griped about how the story itself not that engaging. Like it's cliched. You got a few things that happen and you see them coming. So with this one, I'm gonna drop the replay down to a 3 supply
Mm.
drops out of 5.
See, I happen to agree with you quite a bit because, as I've mentioned, I have played every single Far Cry, and as far as replay value goes, I don't really consider it one of those games that I would revisit. It just isn't. And the reason why I say that is because I haven't either. And I have played all of these subsequent titles. So for me, is it fun to grind through a Far Cry game to go after collectibles and, all of the cool, unique things? Yes, it is. When it comes to me wanting to replay it, though, don't really feel like doing it. I just don't. I have never felt that way. And I don't know if it's because I don't feel compelled to, or if it's because the trophies are already gathered and I don't feel a need to play to serve out that means anymore. But I would say it's even as simple as locking you from being able to get certain things until a certain point in the game. Because honestly, you don't have to go capture any unique animals at all. You can play the game and not even have to worry about that stuff. So the idea to me to have to play to a point to then be able to have a bag that's just 10 slots bigger than the previous one, not something that I want to do again.
Yep.
But while I was playing the story the first time and going through this stuff, yes, I couldn't put it down. But for me, it's a 2.5 out of 5 because I would literally never go back to figure out what the Rocket people were doing. Frankly, I just don't care.
Yeah.
And honestly, when it comes to the music, I've got to be just as harsh because this is a game that really doesn't have a profile when it comes to the music.
No.
It just doesn't. We've talked about this before in other games where you have very specific things you remember and the music can elicit a response from you. I mean, we were just talking about this a week ago where Grand Theft Auto 5 has the ability to do that to you, right? Or Grand Theft Auto 3, apologies. Far Cry 3, I couldn't tell you a single note of music from this game. I just don't. It's pretty much like if there was like an AI that just focuses on Michael Bay's score for a movie, you've got that in Far Cry 3.
Yeah.
So this is probably the lowest score I have ever given to any game in any numerical category. 2.0 out of 5 for the music on this game.
Ouch. Yeah, that's low. Oof. Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not going to do it much better because kind of the same thing. I feel like the music's there when you first start the game, emphasizing the good time you're having with your friends. And then suddenly you get this big tonal shift when the cell phone's pulled back and you see Voss. And of course, like when you go to the final fight with Voss, not the final fight of the game, but with him, that music kind of ramps up and engages you. But like, as far as like, any of the other stuff, like I feel like it's like I can't remember a thing. Like I feel like it's honestly like I think it's just jungle noises. That's what I got going on with it. So this is one where I don't know if I'm going to give it like the lowest score I've ever given, but I am going to go down to 2.5 supply drops out of 5 on this one, just because like you get like nice little glimpses in 2 parts of the game, but past that, if it's there, it's barely there, and it's again like cliche. I'm pretty sure we get some drum beating in a few of the Sintra moments with a rock yacht, but outside of that, I got nothing.
Well, I for those keeping score at home, this should be no surprise, but this game got a 28 out of a possible 40 supply drops, which brings it to 70% on the dot. Now, Joe, statistically, this is the worst rating we have ever given for any game we've ever done a retro review of. However, I do think that this is an accurate rating for this game because when you think about Far Cry, especially Far Cry 3, this is a game that I think a lot of people look back to fondly, but I guarantee you that people aren't going back and dusting this title off.
Probably not.
every 2 or 3 years. Like, they're not doing that with this. But what I will say about this game is that this is the image with which the rest of the series has continued to keep, right? Because 1 and 2 were totally different games, and the things that they started with in 3, they've continued to reform, tweak a little bit. And so it should be this score.
Yeah.
Because the formula couldn't be perfect with this game. Now, the rest of the series isn't perfection either, but I will say that it deserves maybe an honorable mention for being the tide-turning title for this series.
Absolutely. And if you've never played this game before and you have, PS4 or 5, because I think 5s are backwards compatible, right? You can get 4
Yeah.
on those. Like, I'd say go out and find the remaster of this game and give the literally the best part of the game a go. Like, it's an enjoyable time your first time through it, because you can see like the things that really hurt it are the replay value. But if you're playing it the one time through, you're going to enjoy it. And if you're not like, hey, I'm not in a game for the music anyway, then you'll probably have a great time, like we did. We definitely both had a great time playing the story mode of this game, and that's why I'd say if you haven't done it before, like, I'd say go out and rent it, but how many places rent video games these days? Like, I'm sure you can find it on the shelves at a GameStop or local, like, GameStop-esque store equivalent somewhere where you can pick it up for a reasonable price, give it a play, and when you're done, take it back, trade it in for something different, and keep the love going. And that is where I think it's time in the program where we thank you for listening to Digital Dissection, as we always appreciate all the Dissection crew does for us week after week. Your support really does go a long way, and if you happen upon the show by accident, why not drop us a review or comment on the show?
Sorry, there's going to be some dramatic silence here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. But hey, we also love hearing from you, especially when it comes to suggestions for future retro reviews. So feel free to message us over at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. We'd like to actually welcome your ideas for anything outside of retro reviews as well, and anything tastefully done that you would like to discuss. And until next time, keep on dissecting.
And watch out for cassowaries.
And Voss.